Atlantisz. The elite in search of immortality. Were there more highly developed civilizations than now? Did Atlantis exist? The existence of an island country where a human-like god reigned, surrounded by his children, an assembly of gods, who ruled people, had wonderful technologies, mysterious magic objects, possessed climatic weapons, the ability to clone a human being, medical technologies prolonging a person's biological life beyond the species limit, meaning increasing life for a long time, the so-called immortality in the body for the selected ones. This information is mentioned in ancient legends of different peoples of the world. An earthly paradise, the country of gods, where supreme god reigned, surrounded by an assembly of gods. The legends about the super-advanced antediluvian civilization, which was situated in the far west on a large island surrounded by water, the country the powerful influence of which once spread all over the world, the country where El autocratically ruled with an entourage of his selected servants, the elite, and endowed his children with power over different nations, refer to very ancient times. Both nations of the East and nations of the West, who lived several millennia ago, still maintain these legends. Each nation called this island state in their own way. For example, in the oldest Sumerian legends, it is the blessed island of Dilmun, the land of the living, where there was no disease and death, the gods' place of dwelling. The scene of the oldest Sumerian myths about the gods Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, about the human Utnapishti who survived the Great Flood. These legends are embodied in the Sumerian epic about the hero Gilgamesh, as well as in the Babylonian poem Enuma Elish. It is precisely from these legends that much later, after many centuries, Hebrew priests borrowed stories about the heavenly Eden, the forbidden fruit, the expulsion from paradise, the Great Flood, and much more. In Celtic mythology, it is the Isle of the Blessed Avalon, located on distant western islands. Its symbols are a glass tower or palace, miraculous apples that grant immortality, and so on. The word Avalon is originally found as a proper name in Welsh genealogy with regard to the mythical ancestor of the oldest dynasties of Britain. In Chinese mythology, the paradise of the immortals, Xi'an, it is located on three sacred mountains, Penlai, Fanjian, and Yinzhou, which swim in the sea ocean. It is mentioned that the immortal people Xi'an mount the clouds, riding the flying dragons. They have the garden of goddess Xivanmu, in which peaches of immortality grow. Pantao. It is known that in legends an immortal people Xi'an often has a guise of a white-bearded old man, and he is portrayed with attributes of immortality. And in the mythology of the Hellenes, that is, the ancient Greeks, this country was called Elysium, the Isles of the Blessed, Atlantis. Hellenes about Atlantis. Atlantis, That is how this highly developed island state in the Atlantic Ocean was first called among the Hellenes by the ancient Hellenic philosopher Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. Plato was a descendant of the Athenian lawmaker of the 6th century BC, Archon, who was called the wisest of the 7 wise men of the country of Ellada, the country known today as ancient Greece. According to Plato, the great mystery that the history of natural cataclysms repeats itself, and the present civilization is far from being the first, was told to Archon during his travels through Egypt by the Egyptian priests. By the way, according to the legends of the Hellenes, Solon's bloodline goes back directly to Poseidon, the god of the seas, who it is thought founded Atlantis and settled his children there. According to an ancient Greek legend, Atlantis was a large island state, which was located on the west of the Pillars of Hercules, opposite the Atlantean mountains. Other ancient sources report about the land of Titan Atlas. Atlanteans waged wars and spread their power far beyond their state. Atlantean society was at the stage of decomposition. Selfishness, power, luxury, ambitiousness, corruption of morals. According to the legend, as a punishment, gods sent down a severe earthquake and a flood upon them. The large island of Atlantis was destroyed during a sudden strong earthquake and rapid flooding. It was flooded in the waters of the ocean in one day and in one disastrous night. According to Plato, the destruction of Atlantis occurred 9,200 years before the time of Archon Solon. That is 12,000 years back from present times. Today there is quite a lot of scientific material on what oceanologists, geologists, geotectonics experts and specialists in other fields of science think on this issue. Many scientists had no doubt about the existence and submersion of a big area of land that had once been located in the Atlantic Ocean between Europe and America, which Plato had mentioned. However, many were astonished by the very fact that in this legend, the land submerged in just one day. However, the current rapid global climate change on Earth, which has been observed over the last 2 years, indicates that in the modern world, any day may become the last for the consumer civilization. As Igor Mikhailovich Danilov said, it is people themselves who by their choice, and exactly by their choice whom to serve, the devil or God, are bringing closer or postponing this end of the world. A lot depends on people. Some people doubt the end of the world. But today, only a fool or someone who doesn't see what is happening behind the window may have doubts. Since ancient times, people who lived on different continents have preserved a common spiritual heritage, which contains an understanding of how a mortal human can attain life without death, how to acquire eternal life, It was based on primordial spiritual knowledge about the existence of the spiritual world, the eternal world of God, that God is one, about the temporality and mortality of the material world. There was an understanding of the power of God, and that it lies in God's love. There was also knowledge about the 7 messengers of the spiritual world, the executors of the will of one God. From time to time, they come to this world at the most important stages for humanity. That is, their immortal spirit temporarily incarnates in this world in a human body, and thus, being in equal living conditions with people, they fulfill their mission until the destruction of the body shell, meaning the death of the temporary body. While 6 of the 7 messengers from the eternal, spiritual world come occasionally and when necessary, one of them is constantly present on earth at God's behest. He has many names, but his true name is Ahriman. In modern terms, he is like a programmer who wrote a program, which is what people at different times called the devil, Satan, Iblis, or simply intelligent system. The system, a part of which is consciousness, and thoughts come into a person from the system. Thoughts have an influence and work according to patterns, like programs. Ahriman constantly monitors the work of his global intelligence system. He stays here, in the material world, for just one day, based on an ancient understanding that the entire material world, with its billions of years, exists for just one day. For many, a question arises: why are the devil and these demons needed in their heads? All these programs with thoughts and emotions that come, build on pridefulness, envy, hatred, and a multitude of earthly desires. However, according to the primordial knowledge, it is precisely they that create the conditions for human choice, whether to be mortal or to attain spiritual immortality. Thoughts seduce and generate earthly desires, stimulate vices, a thirst for power, and dead attributes of the material world. But these programs' filters, the devil and the demons, are also all-seeing guards at the gates into true paradise, God's heaven. The spiritual world is a world where there is no matter. It's a world in which there is another form of existence, interpreted in human understanding as God's love. People called by different names the immaterial place where messengers from the spiritual world constantly reside. One of the names known today is the legendary Shambhala, headed by Rigden Japo. According to the primordial knowledge, Shambhala is located between the real, eternal world of God and the temporarily existing material universe. That is, in the highest, 72nd dimension of the sphere. It is from there came the mention of the number 72 in ancient legends, tales, and images. It should also be noted that the familiar material world changes already in the 4th dimension, and in the 7th it's no longer present as matter. The seal of Shambhala is the ancient Alatra sign, stylized as the all-seeing eye of God, or the sun rising from the horizon in a triangle with divergent rays. A territory or place in which Shambhala had an interest was marked by the seal of Shambhala as a sign. Similar signs of distinction were worn by representatives of Shambhala when they temporarily incarnated in this world, as well as by those from among the worthy people who held them. As there have been before, and to this day, there are many legends about Shambhala, which are intertwined with legends about the cosmic world mountain. In the legends, it's been associatively said that immortal gods live on the top of this world mountain. This concept is associated with an immaterial place located outside three-dimensionality, which can be spiritually visited by those who are called saints. And this is connected with the processes of significant spiritual transformation of a human being from mortal to an immortal one, and has nothing to do with matter as such, meaning neither with a person's physical body nor with any material place on earth. Possessing this understanding, it is easy to distinguish wheat from chaff. When the primordial knowledge is lost, a human being feels the primordial spiritual. This is embedded in him at a subconscious level. But a human also hears the thoughts that consciousness is constantly dictating to him, and he mistakenly perceives them as his own. Whatever a person chooses in himself, what he attaches his attention to, is what he eventually receives. Loss of spiritual knowledge occurs when a person ceases to work on himself spiritually, loses his inner connection with God, that is, the possibility of gaining his real immortality in a temporary life. Instead, he begins as a servant to fulfill directives of consciousness, to seek immortality and salvation in the material world. The result is definitely set as subpersonality. The patterns of consciousness as a part of the system are the same at all times. Therefore, everything in this world is stereotypical and repeats itself after a certain period of time. 12,000 years is just a cycle. What happened in Atlantisz? A majority of people have chosen a consumer format of civilization in their minds. The desire to achieve immortality in the body became the dominant idea. Consciousness began to actively distort and substitute the primordial spiritual knowledge with directives beneficial to the system. Thus, ancient religions were born, where spiritual action inside a person was replaced by an external spectacle and satisfaction of earthly desires. Atlantisz is an example of that. Thus, due to the loss of primordial knowledge, in the legends people began to call the 7 messengers from the spiritual world gods. This misconception by the majority was taken advantage of in their earthly interests by ordinary mortal people who, having gotten their hands on power, resorted to the latest achievements of science, the discovery of prolongation of human life beyond the species limit. They called themselves the legendary immortals, although at the same time they remained mere mortal people who just significantly increased the term of their life. An ordinary mortal man named El declared himself the supreme god. He appropriated names and epithets from the legends of one of the 7 messengers from the spiritual world who permanently resided on earth, Ahriman. And then he appointed as gods first his entourage and then his children, giving them the names of the legendary messengers of the spiritual world. And to make people believe him and his entourage, and to support their power, El and his servants, the elite, created Elysium on an island with a favorable climate and a single low mountain, similar to descriptions of the world mountain. As a result, after several generations of their power, people could no longer distinguish where the truth was and where the fiction. only nothing remained of the holy. The society became degraded. Salvation of the body became the goal of people's life. And the concept of one God turned into worship of a material image of a mortal man with a beard sitting on the throne. It only seems to a mortal human that his earthly power is unlimited. But this is only an illusion created in his consciousness by the system itself. In actual fact, he becomes a controlled slave. Whatever thought the system imposes on him is what he will execute with obedience. The descendants of those who managed to survive after annihilation of Atlantis, to hide from retribution and to survive the subsequent times of the new spiritual formation of humankind, became keepers of the ideological heritage of Atlantis. When the epoch of patriarchy came, they started to actively propagate the ideas of omnipotence and sought to implement them, and to establish a new world order, planning for centuries ahead. Controlled by the patterns of consciousness, they played a game of the system in secret knowledge and secret activity. They established closed groups, clans, secret orders, organized initiations into the so-called Great Mystery of Mysteries, presenting the story of the country of El as fate of the selected ones, endowing their pridefulness with belonging to a supposedly dominant race of highly developed people, which, in their opinion, must rule over all people on Earth, that is, to the servants of El, the elite. This can be clearly traced at different times in history. It was precisely on their initiative that there appeared stories, including the ones about Atlantis and the mountain of the immortal Olympic gods. This information was subsequently implanted in the minds of new generations as a pattern of behavior. After all, what is permitted to gods is what human pridefulness will invariably copy for itself as well. The descendants of the Atlanteans took many other initiatives, causing a majority of people today to have lost their spiritual knowledge, to dream about immortality in material bodies, and not even to know that already for a long time they've been living under the aegis of El and unconsciously seeking to imitate his elite. But this didn't happen immediately. The descendants of the Atlanteans waited for the time when the system would gain strength and would again dominate in people's minds, the time when humankind's spiritual resistance will be weakened, because they knew the main thing, that everything starts with a human being and his choice. How it really happened. When the era of patriarchy came, priests and militant leaders usurped power. That's how many gods endowed with human passions appeared, as well as bloodthirsty teen gods who are portrayed in material bodies with symbols of power and attributes of immortality. And this entire system of power was promoted owing to a mixture of particles of spiritual grains of primordial knowledge, otherwise it would not be so attractive to a majority of people, with the directives beneficial to the system, such as division of people, domination of some over others, hatred, intolerance. As a result, the society has degraded by means of the conventional patterns of consciousness programs, military clashes, conquests, exploitation. A simple example is the first Sumerian city-states in which the first kings ruled. Have you ever wondered why world history in different countries of the world, in school textbooks and textbooks for higher educational institutions, begins with the 4th, 3rd millennium BC from the ancient cities of Mesopotamia and Egypt, and then, as a rule, ancient India, China, and Ellada, ancient Greece, are pointed out? Why is the attention of new generations intentionally concentrated on this Middle Eastern region and precisely on this particular period of time. Based on whose initiative, or more precisely, who is the sponsor of the dominance of exactly this opinion in this inexact science of guessing dates and events, as though nothing more significant had existed before. Neither megalithic cities on different continents, nor Terpelian cities of 10,000 people in the territory of ancient Europe, nor highly developed cities in Eurasia, whose inhabitants led a peaceful way of life. It's not even reported that before the Sumerians there had lived people in Mesopotamia who had particularly respected the alatra sign, as well as other people on different continents since ancient times. And why in this world history of the selected ones were all communities of people before this period conditionally called cultures, and later on civilizations, and the first city-states? The answer lies in the word state. Due to adoptions from other languages and translations, we come across such interpretations as dominance, lordship, dominus, lord, power, head of the family. Ancient sources of the origin of the word dominance lead to the Sumerians. After all, it was at this time in the East that active propaganda of the ancient supreme deity, the primal forefather named El, began. The history of his rise, the struggle for power with old gods and their overthrowing, the rule of the nations by his children, and the assembly of gods under his rule. Considering that the power of religion reigned supreme in Sumeria, and it propagandized the assembly of gods led by the main god, it becomes clear from what family of gods the example of governance of peoples was copied. The kingdom of the mind. What did the history of the so-called civilization of the people that had come to the fertile valley of Mesopotamia start from? From carve-up of surplus and from bureaucracy. The first pictographic texts were accounting records, economic lists, and checklists. To put it simply, the era of matriarchy was ruined by daily routine, as well as by patriarchy's thirst for power. The same thing happens to a person who loses spiritual connection with God within himself. Dictatorship of consciousness arises in him. He begins to pay excessive attention to his living conditions in three-dimensionality, at a loss to his spiritual development. And when the kingdom of the mind predominates, everything is stereotyped, regardless of whether in a family or in a community. Identification of an external enemy, a desire to seize neighboring territories, exploitation of surrounding people, and the struggle for power. What does this lead to? Was the country of Sumer actually a country of free people? Sumer of the late 3rd millennium BC was a country that constantly waged aggressive wars, a country of mercenaries, of slaves bought or captured in the war, a country of debtor slaves who sold their family members and themselves into slavery. It was a country that lived by a collection of laws of kings who proclaimed themselves vicars of gods. The country of 30 pieces of silver, where human life was expressed in the measure of the value of commodity of that time, silver. This is evidenced by the tablets with annual reports of overseers concerning transactions with labor force and slaves. And this kingdom of mind, of the slaves and servants of God Enlil, spread its tentacles to Syria, Asia Minor, and Elam. Strangers with a story of El. The ethnonym, meaning the name Sumerians, is a scientific abstraction. It's not a self-designation of the people. This name is simply used to denote the people who came to Mesopotamian fertile lands. The general literary heritage of ancient Mesopotamia, which has been preserved through the cuneiform tablets of the Sumerians, and then the Akkadians who adopted their heritage, and later on in the writings of the Babylonian priests, tells first and foremost the story of a power formation, which repeats the antediluvian history of the omnipotence of long-lived El and his elite. El here is already endowed with the qualities of God Enlil, Akkadian Enlil, who later on became one of the main gods of the Sumerian Akkadian pantheon. Moreover, echoes of the old legends left from the primordial knowledge can be traced here. About the 7 gods, among whom was also Enlil, one of the Ahriman's names. About the fact that Enlil was the second to the heavenly god named Anu and was his permanent representative on earth. But already in the Sumerian legends, the antediluvian story of the world autocrat El is actively ascribed to Enlil of the 7 gods. The following became Enlil's main epithets: the Great Mountain, the Lord of all the lands, the Lord who determines destinies, the Lord whose utterances are immutable, and the Father of gods. There was even such an expression, the Enlil of all the gods, Enlilship over the gods. The term Enlilship means dominance, lordship. In the Sumerian hymn, Enlil is everywhere, in which Enlil is honored, his epithets and deeds of gods are listed. This cult text, designated to intensify collective emotions, contains such words: without Enlil, the great mountain, no city would be built, no settlement would be founded, no cowpen would be built, no sheepfold would be established, no king would be elevated, no priest would be given birth, no high priest would be elected by oracle, soldiers would have no generals or captains. The temple of Enlil is a mountain of abundance. They take sacrifices there, they grant absolution. Enlil, if you look upon the shepherd favorably, if you elevate the one truly called in the land, then the foreign countries are in his hands, the foreign countries are at his feet. There is a good example. One of the first ancient cities of Mesopotamia, Eridu, is called the city of the first kings. According to legends, its patron, god Enki, the son of Enlil, acts as the organizer of the world order on earth. The city is ruled by the son of Enki himself, a man named Adapa, who was half god, half human hero. It was believed that Adapa was the one who brought civilization to the city from the island of Dilmun, meaning from the island of the immortals. By the way, in the Akkadian mythology, Adapa is one of the 7 sages. A similar story about the 7 sages much later existed also in ancient Greece, Ellada, where Solon was also called one of the 7 sages. Nothing more than fiction. What patterns of behavior were implanted in the minds of the younger generation, and who benefited from this? The Sumerians began to actively write and replicate texts of the legends about the country of El. For these purposes, special schools were opened, Duba, or tablet houses, scribal schools, where they began to prepare scribes and those who would be their heralds among the people. It is interesting that when the Sumerian language had become dead, up to the 1st millennium BC, it was used as a sacred literary language, and the language of science in that very Assyria and Babylon. In fact, Latin today is used according to the same scheme. That is, the dead Sumerian language was understandable only to the selected ones. Moreover, many symbols of cuneiform writing expressed precisely Sumerian words and their meaning, whereas phonation of Akkadian words was initially written through combination of sumerograms similar to present-day rebuses and charades. Yet why were such complexities and secret actions needed for transmission of ordinary literary epos, myths, and folklore? If it was such, the Sumerians made the text convenient for memorization and easily perceivable by ear. Moreover, the plot was designed so as to cause collective emotions by means of the story, to put a crowd of listeners into an emotional state set in the text, because the content was mostly known to listeners in advance. Generally speaking, in modern understanding, to prepare mass media journalists. Although before this, for a long time, cult texts had been just memorized and passed on from generation to generation. By the way, exactly the same method was used several centuries later for dissemination of Homer's Iliad among the Hellenes and other peoples. Only those heralds journalists were already called rhapsodists, the sons of Homer. Why did such a bureaucratic state as Sumer, where everything was on a register, even every fruit on a tree was counted, suddenly allow itself such spendings on epos? What were the goals of the sponsors of this activity? The fact is that all this mythology, intertwined with religion, consequently affected the worldview of not only these people, but also of the successors to their literary heritage, the Akkadians and later the Babylonians, and from them it was spread to other peoples, but with the only difference that in subsequent generations they no longer remembered the primordial, but literally to contrast what was said by local priests who were concerned about their power. The system has strengthened its positions in the minds of people. Basically, a role model for imitation was being prepared for people. What human-like gods allowed themselves to do was the same thing people did, following their example. Moreover, the goal of human existence was being substituted. Instead of the true meaning of human life, understanding of what a human had been created for, that is, transformation into a spiritual being, merging with God's love within oneself. Priests, under the dictation of their consciousness, were implanting things beneficial for the system into the minds of the congregation. Namely, since childhood a person was being implanted with an idea that the goal of creation of a human being was to work for gods, to cultivate land, to graze cattle, to collect fruits, to feed gods with their sacrifices. That is, to work for El and his elite, devoting all their lives and all their attention to the external, which is what is still observed to this day in such a format of human society as a consumer civilization. Worldview: Sumerian and Babylonian literature. What was hidden in the role model for imitation? Pridefulness, murder, drunkenness, deceit, revenge, vanity, selfishness, betrayal, human love with the help of witchcraft. Generally speaking, all those same pattern directives of the system in the people's consciousness. Division of people. As in El's country, the system's ideology: divide and rule. As in El's country, and this will be explained in detail later in the story about the gods of Olympus, in the legends of the priests of ancient Mesopotamia, people were divided into gods, heroes, and savages. And considering how the descendants of the Atlanteans, the Archons, have replicated these images in the minds of people for centuries, striving for a single world power, this can be observed even now in the modern world society. The assembly of the gods, elite, were patrons of people, endowed with all human attributes and qualities, possessing magical objects, high technologies, As an example, god Shamash made it easier for the hero Gilgamesh to defeat the monster, thanks to the 7 winds that blow at the will of Shamash. The monster had killing rays and guarded a special area of an unusual cedar forest of the god Enlil. Today, many rich people of the world dream of being elected to the circles of the world elite, or at least of being of use to them, strive to have protection and their patronage for their mini empire, be it a business or an influence on a territorial region. Heroes. An example, the image of Gilgamesh, were lucky fellows, all of whose feats were not due to their own merit, but due to some mighty patron among the gods, from the elite of El, who possessed magical objects. That is, there was a programmed hero who was supposed to destroy the evil that his patron considered to be evil, and then to die young. In general, as the gods would decide at the Council of the Gods. During their short life, the heroes had to think about the meaning of life, to seek immortality in the body, since the gods had already possessed this immortality, and the highest manifestation of courage, it should have been a recognition of one's own defeat. Promoted later in literature, to the point of the hero's suicide. Today, millions of people since childhood dream to be like the famous hero Superman of their time, from worldwide popular movies, TV series promoted by mass media. And as adults, by imitating them, many people risk their lives for sake of realization of the world elite's plans, while they don't even know who they actually work for and why. Savages. Example, the image of Enkidu, the servant of Gilgamesh. A savage, a faceless creature, who joined the civilization and became a devoted servant of the hero. He had to pay to the gods with his sufferings and death for his and the hero's common accomplishments. Today, billions of people stay in a state of misery and poverty, barely living from paycheck to paycheck. Since childhood, they dream of at least standing next to famous people, not to mention of being as useful for them as possible, in order to break out of poverty to become decent people. Fixed idea: immortality in the body. The system's dream about its immortality. The striving of the main hero to achieve immortality takes a central stage in the Mesopotamian literature. The epic titled He Who Saw Everything about the hero Gilgamesh is built around this plot and is repeated in different versions for different peoples, on which the sphere of influence of the descendants of El spread in different countries. But it's important to note the main theme of these works. It is supposedly impossible for a person to achieve the main goal of his search: eternal life. The futility of human efforts in trying to attain immortality and eternal youth, that is, the fate of the gods. And the ending, that is, the emphasis on the idea of the work, highlights that the only immortality that is available to a person is the memory of his deeds that glorified his image and name. What do we see today? Billions of people don't know about the spiritual aim of their lives. Other billions of people, considering themselves religious people, don't know how to really achieve immortality during life. This lack of knowledge is used by the world elite for their own secret manipulative goals. And how many people in the world dream about their own career, to become famous, glorify their name, commemorate it for the ages, so that everyone would know about them. For such a mass psychosis, all the conditions have been created in the consumer society by the hands of people themselves. And it doesn't matter in what scale one or another consciousness thinks. One dreams to glorify one's name through some nonsense on the internet, having put up a lot of photos of oneself, and another, via supermind, releasing volumes of scientific works with his photograph. or giving his name to a new kind of mollusks. Everyone's consciousness works stereotypically, to glorify one's own name. But why is the system interested in promoting such a pattern as immortality in the body, achievement of eternal youth? Why does it focus a person's attention on promotion of his own image and name? Knowing the primordial spiritual knowledge and realizing that the system changes the essence of the knowledge, one can understand that the answer is hidden in 2 points: immortality in the body, today they call it salvation, and glorifying the name. According to the primordial spiritual knowledge, any person can achieve immortality during the temporary existence of his body. That is, spiritually develop himself by means of the deepest feelings to such a state of inner spiritual transformation when he, the personality as a spirit, begins to live in the spiritual world. It's important to know that only spirit can be immortal, but not the physical body or consciousness. Consciousness doesn't understand this. God is a material image for it. Consciousness is incapable of experiencing deep feelings. It can only talk, think, and create emotions. And what does consciousness understand? It understands only what the system understands. In the system's understanding, immortality in the body is prolongation of life beyond the species limit. It's an increase in the term of one's own life. Although the system understands its own finiteness, after all, its lifetime is predetermined as that of an ordinary program. So the promise of immortality in physical body is its patterned trick, proven by millennia. An illusion by living which people, without being aware of it, waste the real power of their attention on feeding the system. And glorification of one's own name via an image in the centuries is also beneficial for the system. Thus, it churns subpersonalities for itself, which are also food for the system, being dead among the living. Enuma Elish. Today, it's not a secret for scholars studying Bible issues that much of it was borrowed by Hebrew priests from the sacred texts of not only ancient Egypt, but Babylon as well. The scripture about the creation of the world, Enuma Elish, was basically the Bible of Babylon, and Babylonian priests, in their turn, borrowed these texts from the Akkadian priests, while the Akkadians had borrowed their cosmological scriptures about the world's origin and the administration of gods from the more ancient nation, the Sumerians, whose god from the assembly of gods is more powerful, depended on the political hegemony of priests in one or another city or country. In fact, there was a struggle to ensure that namely their god would be awarded the epithet and lordship over gods. The names of main gods and heroes were changing, but the essence anyway remained the same. The story of the seizure of power and the omnipotence of El and his elite over people. Enuma Elish is a Babylonian Akkadian holy scripture, ancient Mesopotamian cosmological texts about the creation of the world and the human race, about the origin of gods and the universe, about the struggle and seizure of power by old and new gods, about how a bunch of gods collided people with each other, how they dominated over peoples, and much more. Babylonian legends emphasize that the cause of people's troubles is not retribution of human sins, but the anger of gods, their desire to reduce the number of ever-growing humankind that bothers gods with its noise. In Enuma Elish, the main role in creation of the world is no longer assigned to Enlil, but to a god named Marduk. And again, the old story is repeated. The main god organizes the world order through violence. The leitmotif of the legend is a violent overthrow of ancient forces, powered by the right of the strongest. Marduk is given the epithet of lordship. that is, Enlilship over the gods. He is called Enlil of all gods. Thus, Marduk holds the main place in the pantheon of gods on the 2nd millennium BC. Due to the efforts of the priests, by the end of the Old Babylonian period, he is already venerated far beyond Babylon. And even later, in the Hellenistic era, the story of Marduk is largely copied by the archons of Hellenes. Only the main god is already called Zeus, and the mountain on which he rules is called Olympus. What is the main goal of this promoted epic poem, Enuma Elish? Here, the main goal is to bring together many gods' images into one. Thus, the features of Sumerian and Akkadian gods Enlil, Enki, Ea, and others have already been transferred to Marduk. That's why in the subsequent epochs, the main god of other peoples and tribes who came under the influence of this system of worldview had such different, conflicting characteristics and human qualities. For example, angry, threatening, intimidating, making a contract with selected people, and arouse bewilderment of believers and their inconvenient questions to the priests. God is one. But why did the system resort to such measures, having transformed multiple images of El and his elite into different qualities of one God? After all, the concept of one God is a concept from the primordial spiritual knowledge. Because in those days, knowledge began to be renewed, thanks to the prophets who preached about one God, and who came to this world to counterbalance the activation of the system. The primordial knowledge of one God had a big resonance among people. However, the prophets came and left, while the system remained in the minds of generations that lived by consciousness. Therefore, the primordial knowledge introduced by the prophets was distorted and replaced by the priests of the dominant religions at the time. They endowed one God with the qualities of their multiple mortal gods from the past, such as anger, hatred, rancor, and so on. And they did everything to make people fear God, but not to love Him, to bring Him gifts and offerings, but not to serve Him. Interesting facts. Do you know such concept as the Triad, the Council of Seven, a personality, a soul, the invisible world? All these concepts were known in Babylonia, the successor of the Sumerian civilization. The Triad, the Council of Seven. For understanding, at the time, the general structure of the pantheon of the gods, which was delineated during the period of the slave-owning Sumer, remains without major changes during the whole period of antiquity, including the Old Babylonian period. That is, at the head of the whole world, there was the Triad, the supreme god Anu, Enlil, and Ea. They are surrounded by the Council of Seven, in other cases of 12 great gods, determining lots, shimtu, of everything in the world. All gods are divided into two clans, into two generic groups, Igigi and Anunnaki. On the reliefs and seals of that time, there are often scenes depicting how the deity patron leads a human to the supreme god to determine his fate and to receive a blessing. It was believed that with the loss of his guardian deity, a person became defenseless against the evil willfulness of the great gods, and he could easily be attacked by evil demons. These are the accent echoes of the time of ruling of El and his elite in Atlantisz, which will be clearly demonstrated a bit later in the story about Olympus. Personality, soul, the invisible world. There were echoes of the primordial knowledge also in Babylonia, and this is evidenced by the fact that in 2nd-1st millennia BC, Inhabitants of this country knew about personality as a spirit. The bearer of a human personality was called lamasso, while human vital forces were called shadow. While understanding of soul, napishtu, meant something impersonal, priests identified it, sometimes with breath, sometimes with blood, meaning that which connected a person directly with one god. Priests, following directives of their consciousness, replaced by material concepts, meaning according to understanding by the system itself. At that time, it was also known of the invisible world, ghosts, embittered shadows of the dead not receiving sacrifices, all kinds of spirits of the underworld, utuki, asaki, lemuti, evil demons, night spirits in Kubililu, visiting women, Sukubi Lilith, Lilitu, possessing men, and others. Mo, secret powers. Mo is one of important theological Sumerian concepts. Today it is often translated as Me, to indicate something that means secret powers, divine essences. For example, there is a myth dedicated to the theft of Enki's Me by Nana. It's not clear when the translation of Mo changed into Me and who was interested in that. In fact, in the primordial knowledge, one of the names of Allah was Mo. Whence among peoples in the late period of the epoch of the human civilization revival, to which the Sumerians belonged to, there were words that reached the Slavonic language as well and are still used today. It is
Мощь, мочь, моё,
and so on. The Sumerians generally had more of O in the speech. In their language, two important concepts have been preserved since olden times: Mo, in the notion of Allah, and Do, as a concept of anti-Allah. Therefore, many names were associated with these words and denoted spiritual powers, powers opposing them. However, while the Sumerian language later on became dead, in the Slavonic language there are still echoes of important concepts since olden times. Do, in the designation of the earthly anti-Allah action, is used to this day in such expressions, for example, as before, for how long would you contradict me, from here to there, road, and so on. Generally speaking, the Slavonic language is one of the few languages which have preserved echoes of the common proto-language of ancient antiquity that was known to peoples living on different continents. It was believed that the mighty powers of Mo, the driving force of the world development, were possessed by humans, peoples, cities, temples. But these mysterious powers could abandon their possessor. Cult objects were also endowed with them, in which these powers kept their invisible properties for some time. Sumerian ideas of Mo evolved into Akkadian ideas about the Tablet of Destinies, the determined movement of the world and world events. Moreover, it was emphasized that possession of these tablets provided a confirmed world domination. In ancient times, it was believed that possession of the knowledge of Mo was very significant, similar to possession of a nuclear briefcase by the world power ruler in the modern world. According to the poem Enuma Elish, goddess Tiamat, Enlil, Marduk, and other gods possessed these tablets of destinies. Enuma Elish, the lordship of El and the elite. As of today, experts, Sumerologists, admit the fact that they still don't know the Sumerian language well enough, and there is a problem of an elementary lack of understanding of ancient monuments of both Sumerian and Babylonian texts. In many cases, they are forced to leave gaps, question marks, or to be satisfied only with a common understanding of some part of the text, often relying merely on their intuition and on that understanding which this civilization has enabled them to acquire through the education provided to them. It is curious how today the title and the first words of the Babylonian epic poem Enuma Elish are being translated for the public, actively focusing attention on the fact that the most likely, it means when on high, putting forward different versions of interpretation of words on the basis of this hypothesis. This kind of covering up the truth is simply beneficial to someone. However, for the initiated ones, it is the rule of El and his elite, whereas for the rest, it is when on high. And the first line of the epic for them sounds like this: before the rule of El and his elite. To write at the beginning of the sacred text before, it was a standard technique in ancient literature as a designation of anti-alat. For example, before there were those and those gods, before there was heaven and earth, before a human was created, there was something initial. That is, before there was something in the meaning of anti-alat. There was alat from the spiritual world, from the world of one God, which gave rise to the whole before, that is anti-alat, and the material world manifested itself. So the one who is more aware of the true history of times, that one understands which story this peculiar Bible of Babylon is talking about, and why ancient priests put these words first, and how later on they translated these for peoples, copying from these texts. The unknown known knowledge. The island of the immortals in midst of archons of the ancient Hellenes and of Hebrew priests. Today legends of archons of the ancient Hellenes as well as of Hebrew priests about the country of El and his island of the immortals are most well known to new generations and are promoted all over the world. By knowing the primordial, one can easily see what has been inculcated for the sake of domination and world power in the common spiritual heritage of peoples, with distortion of its essence and meaning. Do you think that you haven't heard about the country of El, but you don't even know that today you live as a slave under his aegis? Think about it. Even if you are an atheist, from where since childhood you have had the image of God as an old man with beard, sitting on a throne? Why since childhood have you had a desire to possess magic objects and be like a belligerent hero from a fairy tale? Why are you attracted by the secret desire to join the immortals and live in paradise precisely in a material body? Why are your aspirations in this world aimed at becoming a selected mortal god, meaning a part of the elite? How strong is El today in your minds? Elite, the servants of El, those who pledge to God El, those who render service to God El, Elysium, Elisha, El. In legends of archons of the ancient Hellenes, who drew their knowledge from ancient priests of the East, the country of El is mentioned under different names. In addition to Atlantisz, the most famous names are Elysium, or the Elysian Fields, and also Olympus. Elysium, in ancient mythology, is the earthly paradise, located on the western end of the earth in the form of an island where those selected by God El lived their lives, whereas heroes and righteous people resided there only after death, and only in the form of a shadow. It's a country of pleasures and delights, which was mentioned by the ancient Hellenic poets Homer and Hesiod. Homer mentions that Elysium is situated at the very edge of the earth, near the banks of the river Oceanus. Elysium played its role in imaginative conceptions of more than one generation of people who adopted from these legends a false idea of the godly paradise as a special place precisely on earth, where the selected ones supposedly live in immortal bodies. What does the word Elysium mean? Elysium, or Elysian Fields, is translated from Greek as the field of dwelling, the dwelling land of God El. Known from the Bible, the ancient Hebrew name Elisha, Elisei, Elis, from which the name the Elysian Fields originated, as we already know, occurs in the 2nd millennium BC on the cuneiform tablets of the Akkadian and Babylonian epic written by the means of the Sumerian cuneiform script. It is interesting that the word El is usually translated as God, might, power, the one who is above, while Ish means human, and the word Elisheva means a person who pledges to God. Moreover, the noun Shevo, oath, has the same root as the numeral Sheva, 7. An interesting chain is revealed. The 7 first mythical sages of Eridu, the city of the first kings of the Sumerian civilization, the 7 first sages in the ancient city of Athens, who played a leading role in the history of Hellas, the 7 pledging to God El. Generally speaking, it should be noted that in ancient times in the Middle East, the concept of a contract, covenant, and its various types was rather widespread. Between people, between kings and their subjects. One of such covenants meant a solemn, unilateral promise, a kind of an oath, when one of the parties undertook to execute certain actions. A special type of contract was a covenant concluded between God and a human being. It resembled a treaty on granting rights by a ruler to his subjects. It is interesting that the term Old Testament is a calque from the ancient Greek, which literally means former contract, the one that was before. El. As of today, the most well-known references to the ancient supreme deity, the progenitor named El, are also preserved in mythology of the peoples that inhabited Syria, Palestine, and Phoenicia from 4th, 3rd millennia BC. Different ancient peoples called El in different ways. For instance, one of the known names of God El is Il, Ilu, Ilim, Elim. In the Hellenistic period, El, Ilu, was identified with Zeus. In addition, he had different epithets by which he was revered by different peoples at other times. For example, in Syria and later on in the Roman Empire, he was revered as Elagabalus, meaning El of the mountain, Heliogabalus, the son of the mountains, or for instance, such epithets of El as El Olam, meaning God the Everlasting One, El Elyon, meaning God Most High, are among the oldest names included in the Tanakh, the Bible of Judaism. It is interesting that the local god of Jerusalem, El Elyon, was revered as the highest god, the creator of heaven and earth, and the lord of the land, access to which was granted by him only on the condition of bringing tithes. El was first and foremost revered as a symbol of supreme power. He was considered the ruler of the world, the father of gods and people, sending down posterity to people, the king of the years, the lord of immortality. He was portrayed as a bearded old man, in long clothes and a tall tiara with horns. El was depicted as accepting a sacrifice and blessing the sacrificer, and also in the image of a bull. Legends say that El lives near the source of the river, near the source of both oceans. He has the counsel of all gods, his children. The gods act only with El's permission. The Ugarit list of gods mentions also El's father, whom El later on overthrows for the sake of his own power. But gradually, El himself loses this power too. In the 1st millennium BC, in the Judaic pre-Judaism pantheon, the image of El merges with the image of Yahweh, Yovo, He was widely revered in Phoenicia. In other tribes, Yahweh is revered as El's son. El's image as a symbol of power, the supreme deity who heads the council of gods, is preserved in the Bible. In the Old Testament, there are such words: God standeth in the assembly of gods, he judgeth among gods. In Hebrew, they sound like this.
מזמור לאסף. אלוהים ניצב בהדת אל, בקרב אלוהים ישפוט.
Moreover, Elohim is one of the names of Yahweh in the Old Testament in the plural. That is, it means not God Yahweh, but gods Yahweh. In the beginning, gods created heaven and earth. In Hebrew, in place of the word God, there stands Elohim. The word Elohim is found almost 2,000 times in the Bible and originates from the Pan-Semitic root El. El is also the ancient name of God in the Bible of Judaism, Tanakh. It's a collection of texts included in the Christian Bible. In the Slavic Bible, it is traditionally translated by the word God in the meaning of being strong, powerful, at the top. Interesting facts. Fact 1. El is still regarded as a patron of not only the ancient cities. El can also be found in the names of geographical places, ancient architectural and temple buildings. El already appears not only in the designations of modern names, but also in the names of entire peoples who don't even know about the true history. Why it is exactly this way, rather than otherwise, that in the lobbies of kings and their rulers, an urgent decision is made about such renaming? And who sponsors such initiatives? And why? For example, let's take the history of ancient Greece. Since the 2nd millennium BC, tribes of the Achaeans, the Achaeans, along with the Ionians, Dorians, and Aeolians, were among the main ancient Greek tribes. However, in the 7th century BC, the Archons decided to give the common name Hellenes to their subordinate tribes residing in the certain territories, and Hellas to the country. That's how it is still called. Whereas for the people, the reason for introduction of such name was suggested with a reference to myths that were also written by the Archons. But the question is, whose history was written by the Archons themselves? Fact 2. Ebabbara, the White House. The White House is a well-known name. But why is the residence of rulers in different countries called precisely this way? Back in the 3rd millennium BC, in ancient Mesopotamia, in the influential cities of that time, Sippar and Ellasar, Larsa, there were 2 temples, the object of special concerns for Babylonian, Assyrian, and Chaldean kings. Thus, in both cities, these temples were called Ebabbara, the White House or the Brilliant House. For example, in Sippar, the White House consisted of 300 rooms and premises, among which there were dwellings of priests and royal chambers. White houses were dedicated to the Akkadian god Shamash, who was the grandson of God Enlil. God Shamash was revered mainly as a god who established laws and watched their fulfillment. He was considered a bearer of light and prosperity, liberated prisoners, and even raised people from the dead. This god was portrayed as an old man with a long beard who is sitting on a throne. Aren't these images familiar to your consciousness? Fact 3. Selected by El. It is interesting that today the word elite in different languages of the peoples of Europe has the same meaning, the selected one, and it is written almost identically, elite.
Wir sind die Elite zu einer neuen Elite.
We are some of the global elite.
Our elite.
Free elite.
You're elite.
Controlled by the elites.
The elite of the elite in Mario Kart.
딱 맞아. 엘리트는 내 몸에
Élite course, c'est là.
de mannequin.
The elite.
We are elite.
Nadia, elite Simone.
엘리트 학생들.
Élite.
Elite pro headsets.
We're the elitist of the elite. Up high! Whoa, hey now!
The term elite appeared since the 12th century in French and since the 14th century in English, in the meaning to elect, to choose for service. That is, to select a servant to whom a subordinate group is assigned. In European languages, the word elite was widely spread by the end of the 19th century. It was brought into general use between 1930s and 1940s. Today, it is said that the ideas that later on served as a basis for creation of the elite theory, namely selection for the ruling circles, upbringing and education of potential leaders, among others, were developed by the descendant of the Archon Solon, the ancient Hellenic philosopher Plato. That very same Plato who exactly mentioned the ancient legend of the Atlantisz. But what was his ideology, and ideology of those whose will he implemented in his works based on? Old new ideology. The Iliad, the Odyssey. The Iliad, the Odyssey are ancient Greek epic poems attributed to the unknown poet named Homer. Until now, these works are extolled for new generations as unsurpassed literary masterpieces, monuments of world significance. But what is their essence? Homeric epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, have similarities with the Babylonian epic Enuma Elish, as well as with He Who Saw Everything about the hero Gilgamesh and other legends of the Sumerian and Babylonian literature. The names of the main gods have been changed, but the keynote concealed in these stories about the epic of the Trojan War and the wanderings of the leading characters comes down to one thing. The last word in the fate of the hero or peoples rests with the Council of Gods, headed by the main human-like god to whom all human qualities and vices are characteristic. In fact, it is not just a monument of the past. It is an inculcation in the human consciousness of the Atlantean ideology, the history of life of gods sitting on the mountain of immortality, Olympus. The Iliad tells about the participants of the Trojan War. The key moments is that all gods of Olympus participated in it. Moreover, not the gods themselves participated, but they gathered a council and decided, headed by Zeus, how the course of events will exactly evolve, who is destined to lose and perish, even if luck was on the side of certain heroes or peoples. Generally speaking, it was like playing chess with oneself. That is, the game of gods was shown, while the listener's consciousness was immersed in emotions of the fights and strife of the heroes, their conflict relations. Speaking in modern terminology, this is a thriller that ends tragically for the characters, where the leading hero, whose example in theory should be followed by people, commits suicide. And again, the idea is asserted that immortality is the destiny of gods, but not of people. The Odyssey also tells about the wanderings of the main hero Odysseus, who miraculously survived the Trojan War, about his meeting with various peoples, monsters, with phenomena of the invisible world, and magic. However, the keynote of the work remains the same. The gods gathered a council and decided on the fate of Odysseus, and then ruled the hero in his wanderings as a puppet. As a result, with the hero's hands, the undesired ones were destroyed, and the obedient ones were rewarded, and the last word rests with gods. Just like in case of the Sumerians, the text was intended for easy memorization and perception by primary consciousness, that is, for the level of perception of a 6-year-old child. Heroes or actions were associated with the moments encountered by a person in everyday life, and this served as an additional reminder of the plot. Just like in the case of Sumerians, these works were addressed specifically to listeners, not to thinking readers, with the purpose of provoking collective emotions. It was assumed that the listener knew the backstory, so the emphasis was made precisely on affecting the listener emotionally. Moreover, as an introduction to such declamations were used the Homeric hymns, containing appeals to different gods. Poems were created by the same technique as the Sumerians had. During a quick emotional recitation, like through music perception, the public's attention is focused on the plot and its development. Such a peculiar ancient rap rock concert. The result is a state of collective excitation of the animal nature in the public. Simply put, a collective egregore was generated. People were emotionally infected with thoughts about the plot, and they themselves became active bearers and distributors of the history about the gods and Olympus among common people. Just like in the case of the Sumerians, when they were preparing their ancient journalists, special people were also being prepared here for promotion. As it has already been mentioned, since the 6th century BC, there were people who at the legislative level had the right to publicly recite Homer's poems, the so-called Sons of Homer, rhapsodes. But who gave birth to the image of Homer himself? So to say, whose son was Homer? What a Homer! Why exactly Homer? Several interesting facts have been preserved in the history. Fact 1. In the first millennium BC, especially between the 10th and the 7th centuries BC, events took place that subsequently influenced the change of the worldview of not only peoples of the East, but also of the West, and reflected on the worldview of modern people. Precisely in those times, the Babylonian epic poem Enuma Elish was popular and continued to be translated into different languages. The ancient Hebrew Bible Tanakh appeared, which later on formed the basis of the Bible's Old Testament. The epic poem of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, was being composed. It is interesting that God Enlil was known to the ancient Hellenes owing to the Babylonian translations under the name Ilinos. And the word Eliada, the Jewish Eliada, is translated from the Hebrew as whom God El knows, or El knew, recognized. Enlilship, Enlil, Ilinos, Eliada, the Iliad. Fact 2. In the Bible, precisely in the Old Testament, there is a mention of the descendants of Noah, the man who survived the flood, according to ancient Oriental stories. Noah had 3 sons. The eldest of them was named Japheth. Japheth had 7 sons. One of them was Homer, and the other was Javan, while one of the sons of Javan was Eliseus, Jewish Elisha. It is they who are considered to be the ancestors of the Hellenes, the ancient Greeks. Fact 3. According to the Greek legends, it is precisely Hellen, the grandson of the Prometheus, in another version, the son of Zeus, who is the progenitor of the Hellenes, while his sons and grandsons are eponyms of the main Greek tribes. Why exactly Mount Olympus? The name of Olympus is of pre-Greek origin. In the legend, Mount Olympus was considered to be sacred and became the abode of the Hellenic gods and the center of mythological stories. Few people know that Mount Olympus got its name from the word El Olam. In fact, it's an expression known since ancient times, meaning the same as the Sumerian, the immortal El's mountain. Until now, in scientific studies or literature of the past, there is the so-called Homeric question. The learned men still argue when, where, by whom, and for whom were these poems composed. Consciousness, as always, draws attention away from the main question to trifles. that is, not global causes of origin, spreading around the world, and the effects of these works on the mind of entire epochs and generations are highlighted. But the dispute boils down to the point who wrote them, one person or a collective of co-authors. And this dispute is traditional, but not focused on the essence. Organized criticism began from the 6th century BC as another way of promotion and drawing attention to the works. Later on, it was organized by means of such authorities as the same Plato, who criticized Homer. He, so to speak, led those who were against in order to manipulate their opinion in the right direction, and Aristotle, who praised Homer's works and accordingly led those who supported. Basically, like in the game of adults, good cop, bad cop. Which is fine, except for the fact that it was the same team. Plato was Aristotle's teacher, the team that fulfilled the wishes of sponsors, who pursued the goal of seizing power and restoring their former world domination. Those sponsors who knew how human consciousness worked and how to activate it. It was not by chance that Aristotle became the teacher of the 13-year-old Alexander the Great, a future creator of the world power who was inculcated with a new worldview through love to the Homer's Iliad, and to such extent that subsequently this conqueror of nations will keep this version of the Iliad compiled by Aristotle under his pillow along with his dagger. It is known that Alexander the Great always carried a volume of the Iliad with him in a golden box. As it is written in the Game of Gods by the plot of the Iliad, the gods quickly create a hero, use him, and then he dies by the gods' will. And his name is used in subsequent propaganda. Nowadays, everyone knows the name of Alexander the Great, but who feels better because of that? The military campaigns of Alexander the Great contributed to dissemination of Hellenism foundations to the east, and this trend was also popularized among peoples. In the Middle Ages, one of the most popular books in several regions of Asia and Africa, as well as in Europe, was The Romance of Alexander, where the biography of the leading character was reinforced with fictional episodes. In the era of Baroque, Alexander the Great became a popular character in theater and painting. The spreading of Archon's worldview is still going on by all means that are available for them. But what is its nature from within? Olympus. Hellenic mythology is called the Olympian mythology, but to what extent do these ancient myths correspond to the memory of life history of the antediluvian highly developed technogenic society under the tyranny of El the Omnipotent? The history of civilization, which is known today as Atlantisz, may be understood only now, in the era of a sharp increase in the development of new technologies. Olympus, the mountain of god El. As legends say, Mount Olympus is a symbol of supreme power. It's the place where the earth merges with the sky, and where the sky turns into the subtle's fiery ether. There is neither rain nor snow there. There is eternal summer. On the Olympus, there are palaces of Zeus and other gods, built and decorated by Zeus' son, Hephaestus. Mountains open and close the gates of Olympus when the gods drive out in golden chariots. Enlilship. Pan-Hellenic ruler, El, the Pantocrator of the world. Zeus, D, acts as a Pantocrator of the world order, as well as a Pantative force, an example of the Pantocrator of the world, and the ruler of the world destinies, the King of Kings, the Pan-Hellenic Pantocrator. He belongs to the third generation of gods, which overthrew the second generation, the Titans. Zeus reigns on Mount Olympus, commands nature, and rules the destinies of people. People originate from the ashes of Titans burned by Zeus. People subsequently bear the Titanic and the Dionysian that is coming from Zeus' origins. The dictation of consciousness. How El seized power. How did Zeus seize power at Olympus? A standard algorithm for operation of consciousness as part of the animal mind system is introduced in the story of Zeus, similarly to the story of the Babylonian Marduk, in the form of a model for mass imitation by new generations. Thus, Zeus overthrew the previous generation of gods, his father Kronos and the Titans, gained supreme power over gods and people, fought for power with his closest relatives, gave birth to children and made them gods, introduced a new law, order, norms of morality, sciences, arts, created his elite, the gods of a new type, created executors of his will, who conveyed his decisions to rulers and heroes in human society. Isn't it familiar story of the Sumerian Enlil and the Babylonian Marduk? Isn't it a familiar story of the formation of power and the reign of that very Alexander the Great, to whom a taste for the Iliad was inculcated since youth? And not only this. Moreover, from the very beginning, this model is introduced by descendants of the Atlanteans with substitutions about the spiritual meaning of God for people. It's introduced in such a way that people understand that the Supreme God is the same as people, with animal passions, as though any alternative of peaceful coexistence of society is not possible. After all, the omnipotent God himself supposedly acts the same way. Why is there, in the minds of modern people, an image of God as of a man with beard sitting on a throne? Who benefits from that? The system doesn't understand what real spiritual life is. That's why the dictatorship of consciousness over personality generates the corresponding images prescribed in the algorithm of the system dictate over people. A human named El, who proclaimed himself God. Zeus and the gods of Olympus have a human look. They are characterized by all human passions, emotions, and amusements. They get married numerous times, live idly and carelessly. The gods feast in their golden palaces. The wife of Zeus is Hera, the golden-haired Apollo with his sister Artemis, the golden Aphrodite, the mighty daughter of Zeus, Athena, and many other gods. The daughter of Zeus, the young Hebe, and the son of the king of Troy, Ganymede, Zeus' favorite who received immortality from him, bring them food that makes them immortal, ambrosia and nectar, the food and drink of the gods. The gods resolve all matters at these feasts. There they determine the destiny of the world and people. High technologies of antediluvian civilization, immortality in the body for those selected by El, prolongation of life beyond the species limit. Different peoples have preserved legends about the past, in which there is interesting information regarding the achievements of science in the antediluvian civilization. In the field of medicine, it is prolongation of life beyond the species limit, meaning significant longevity of people of the time, as well as possession of medical technologies of body rejuvenation. These legends are related to the drinks and food of the immortal gods. Ambrosia, soma, amrita in old Indian stories, rejuvenating apples in the stories of peoples of the West, peaches in Chinese legends. For the Sumerians, these are technologies which look like cedar cones in the images of the time. They are produced in a special place, a cedar forest where god Enlil has set his personal guard. But if we summarize these mentions of different peoples about the same technology that makes people long livers, we can understand the following. There existed a laboratory for the production of this remedy, food of the gods, which was situated on a separate mountain island and thoroughly protected by the order of the supreme ruler of gods, the Lord of Air and Sky. In myths it is called differently: the Garden of the Hesperides, Emaina Blach, the Island of Apples in the Land of Eternal Youth, the Magic Apple Isles, Insula Avalonis, Mount Mujavat, etc. The island itself was situated on the edge of the world near the banks of the river Oceanus. Keepers of the golden apples of eternal youth were several women. For example, in the ancient Greek legends, those were the nymphs Hesperides, daughters of the Titan Atlas. At that the garden itself was guarded by an object that tried to destroy everyone who came to steal these apples. And as a rule, those were mortal people, heroes who performed their exploits or hunted for the secret of immortality or of long life. For example, the ancient Greek Heracles, the Sumerian Gilgamesh, the ancient Indian king of birds Garuda, and others. For the Hellenes, it was the guard of the place with the fruits of immortality, the 100-headed dragon Ladon. For the Sumerians, in the legend Gilgamesh and the Immortal One's Mountain, it was Huwawa, a multi-legged and multi-armed creature surrounded by the striking magic rays of radiance, the spirit of the tree on which these wonderful apples grew. In ancient Greek legends, it is mentioned that the goddess Gaia presented this tree to Zeus' wife Hera on the day of her wedding, while Gaia herself was the keeper of ancient wisdom, the oldest pre-Olympian deity, thanks to whom the first generation of gods, titans, other creatures, and natural phenomena emerged. However, ancient Indian legends left a more detailed technical description of the place, where the main secret of immortality of the god of air and sky Indra was kept. In the legends, which describe how the bird hero was stealing the Amrita, having assumed a golden body bright as the rays of the sun, it is said that he entered there, like a torrent entering the ocean. Near the Amrita, there was a wheel of steel, keen-edged and sharp as the razor, revolving incessantly. And that mighty instrument of fearsome and terrible looks, shining with the fiery rays, had been artfully devised by the gods to destroy all robbers of the Soma. Having bypassed that wheel, he had to defeat 2 snakes guarding the Amrita. Of the radiancy of blazing fire, of terrible looks, with tongues bright as the lightning flashes, with mouth emitting fire, possessing great energy, always in anger, and of great activity. Their blazing eyes contained poison. They were ceaselessly inflamed with rage and were also wingless. He who may be seen by even one of the 2 would instantly be reduced to ashes. There was a constant fight and strife between gods for these apples of eternal youth. Hence the name the Apple of Discord arose. Interesting details have been preserved in German and Scandinavian myths about the goddess of eternal youth Idun, who was allowed to collect these wonderful fruits for the gods. The rejuvenating apples, thanks to which gods preserved eternal youth, had one feature. Their effect lasted 40 days. And if there was no further consumption of these wonderful apples, this loss immediately made gods old. Their eyes became misty, their skin hung loose, their minds started to soften, and a threat of death hung over them. Why was this happening? And the point here is not the mistakes of science. After all, prolongation of life beyond the species limit is also possible without consequences. It's all about the total control by El of his elite. El carried out such control every 40 days. Therefore, once in 40 days, all the gods gathered at a feast, where those who pleased El received this medicine, prolonging life for another 40 days. And if anyone decided to disobey El and became self-willed, he simply, wherever he was, quickly got old and died. That's why everyone implicitly obeyed El in order to live. The mortal, immortal gods. But were these so-called gods really immortal? No. For instance, in ancient Greek legends, it is said, fate rules over mortals and gods. Even the fate of Zeus himself is in the hands of the relentless goddesses of fate, Moirai, who spin the life thread of a person, determining the term of his life. Once the thread breaks, life will end. Medical rejuvenation technologies. And what has got into possession of the elite from the epoch of grandiose scientific discoveries in the field of rejuvenating medicine? Only cosmetic treatments. In the myths, it is mentioned that gods could control beauty and transform other people at their will by means of certain technical objects which are called magic objects in the legends. For example, Homer describes that goddess Athena made Odysseus higher, more handsome, and curl his hair with a single touch of her magic wand. Athena also transformed Penelope on the eve of a meeting with her husband. She made her taller, wider, and poured on her the ambrosia ointment that Aphrodite herself used. Intercontinental flights. The myths of people of the world mention flights of gods, kings, and their messengers on high-speed means of transport through the air, which often looked like a bird. Thus, for instance, the king Etana rode an eagle up to gods, and then returned to his city to continue the reign. Eris, who delivered messages of the Olympian gods and carried out their orders, had iridescent light wings that transferred her faster than thought, in the blink of an eye, bringing her to the most distant lands. In Chinese legends, it is mentioned that the special feature of life of Xian is their constant flights on cranes. Xianhe, crane of the immortals, the ability to race on clouds, to ride flying dragons. That in their country of immortality, they flew from one mountain to another and wandered beyond the four seas. In ancient Mesopotamia, the eagle is indicated as a symbol of the war deity, the Sumerian Ningirsu, Enlil's son. In the legends of ancient India, it is mentioned that gods were riding heavenly chariots, rapidly overcoming great distances. As for information technology, there is a mention of an ability to operate and use holographic images and transmit them at a distance. The gods of Olympus supposedly could assume different shapes. Zeus himself often assumed the images of clouds, rain, a bull, or an eagle when visiting various places. The image of a bull was also assumed by Marduk and Enlil. Construction technology. Construction technology is also mentioned in the legend of Zeus, son Zethus, and his twin brother Amphion. During the construction of the walls of the Thebes city, Zethus carried and piled stones, while Amphion, with mere layup laying, caused them to move and made them fit into a specified place. Magic objects. There are clear signs of the use of various technical objects. Thus, for example, Hermes, one of the representatives of the elite of Olympus, the son of Zeus and Maia, one of the daughters of Atlas, who was a mediator between people and gods, the patron of magic, trade, and heralds, had winged sandals, Talarias, giving him an ability to rise in the air and move at a great speed. He also had a magic staff, Caduceus, which made people fall asleep or wake up. It was used to convey the will of gods to mortal people, and most often it was done in a dream, when a person was sleeping. Hermes handed out magic objects to heroes. He knew the secrets of Hades, covered and accessible only to the initiated ones. Wind's control. In ancient Greek legends, there is a mention of the Lord of the Winds Aeolus, the king of the floating island of Aeolia. According to the Odyssey by Homer, the main character, while being Aeolus' guest, received from him a leather bag as a gift, in which the winds were sewn, with a strict order not to open it. But when Odysseus continued his journey on the ship, his companions accidentally opened the bag. The winds, having escaped from there, led the ship away from its destination track and drove the ship back to the island of Aeolia, where Odysseus was already denied hospitality. The legend of a leather bag with the winds contained in it is also found in other mythologies. A high-speed ship with an autopilot system is also mentioned in the legends of Odysseus. It is mentioned that the ships of that very Odysseus were equipped with communication devices. A piece of Dodonian oak was fixed on the bow of the ship. thanks to which the ship itself gave prophecies and declared the will of Zeus to the Argonauts. How El gave out allotments to his adult children. The legends about the gods of Olympus, as well as the legends about the gods of the Sumerian and Akkadian pantheon, and the legends of other peoples of the East have preserved a variety of references on how El gave out allotments, lands on different continents with peoples inhabiting them, to his children whom he declared gods. The names of cities, tribes, localities, mountains, seas, calendar months, and so on originated from the names of these gods. For example, in the legends about the gods of Olympus, it is mentioned that one of the beloved names of Zeus, who bore him Hermes, was called Maya. From the nymph Maya, the name of the month of May is derived. She was offered sacrifices on the 1st of May. It is curious that up to now the 1st of May is officially celebrated as a holiday in many countries, although the names of the holiday itself and the reasons for this memorable date are different. Entertainment of the children gods. Just like in the legends of Sumer, in the legends about Olympus, there were mentions of how these gods, El's children, had fun, including fulfillment of their selfish evil whims. Starting from renaming of peoples, sowing discord among peoples, disputes among themselves for the territory of prosperous cities, and punishment of people for any of their choices in favor of one or another arguing god, forcing people to pray to them, and up to their orgies and murders of people, which was a usual entertainment of the gods. Thus, for example, in the Olympian mythology, there is a legend about the fate of the family of Niobe, the daughter of Tantalus, the wife of the Theban king. Niobe had 7 sons and 7 daughters, beautiful like gods. Once she didn't attend a prayer service and a sacrificial offering to the goddess of the Olympus, the daughter of the Titans, Leto, and her twin children Apollo and Artemis, as women of this city used to do, praying to them as gods. Niobe had the imprudence to boast of the number of her children compared to Leto. After all, Leto had only 2 children, moreover illegitimate ones from Zeus, Apollo and Artemis, and was persecuted for this by the wife of Zeus, Hera. Leto found out what the wife of the Theban king had said about her, became angry, and complained to her children, who resided on Olympus. Apollo and Artemis immediately rushed and killed with their arrows all Niobe's children. The whole family died in an instant, and her husband, when he found out about the death of his children, committed suicide. Because of grief, Niobe turned into a stone, with a powering source, her tears. Even in the form of a stone, Niobe didn't stop feeling her sorrow, mourning her children. That's how the gods entertain themselves. It is interesting that nowadays the first day of summer is celebrated in many countries as holiday, the International Children's Day. The only question is, in honor of whose children the holiday on the first day of summer was named. Today many people know the name Leto. That is, the killer of children, but not Niobe, the mother who lost her children and her entire family. Games of Gods. Entertainment of Zeus. On the Olympus there prevailed envy, rage, anger, revenge, constant conflicts and quarrels, sorting out who is better, who has greater influence among the elite of the gods, and who is more powerful and glorious among mortal people. As they say, the fish rose from the hat. How did Zeus entertain himself? The legends of the gods of Olympus mention the following. Zeus destroys the race of Atlanteans who forgot about worship of the gods. Zeus destroyed the human race several times, trying to create a perfect human, because his desire was to destroy the miserable kind of people and to plant a new one. Zeus sends curses, which are terribly implemented on certain heroes and a number of generations of people. Legends of Tantalus, Sisyphus, Atreides, Cadmites. By the order of Zeus, Prometheus was chained to the rock for stealing the spark of the Hephaestus fire to help people doomed by Zeus to a miserable fate. In honor of Zeus, the Pan-Hellenic Olympic Games were held in Olympia. Trojan War. Zeus disposes of heroes. One of the central topics of Homer's Iliad is the Trojan War. The ancient writers explain the origin of the Trojan War as the will of Zeus, who wished to reduce the earth's burden. Not only Zeus contributed to the emergence of the Trojan War, but the war itself was also a consequence of Zeus' decision to punish people for their wickedness. It all began with pride and strife. According to Zeus' will, the events leading to long-lasting war have developed. And the games of gods started. Chess games began to be played out. If you carefully trace the history of various wars of humanity, reigning from the Sumerians to this day, you can see that the severest wars in human history were played out identically. Large troops were gathered from the warring parties. The Achaean army included the noblest heroes: Odysseus, Achilles, both Ajaxes, Diomedes, and many others. Agamemnon, as the most powerful of the Achaean kings, was elected the leader of the whole army. He was fabulously wealthy and had an eminent position among the Hellenic kings. The Achaean fleet, which was assembled in the harbor, contained over 1,000 ships. Before the decisive battles, plague was sent upon the troops. After long wars and conquest of Troy, not only the population of that area and its defenders were killed, but the victorious heroes were also destroyed. The quarrels immediately arose in the camp of the Achaeans. By the will of the gods, a lot of ships, deceived by the false signal of Nauplius, perished of the waves and wind during the terrible storm, while others crashed upon coastal rocks. Even the surviving troop commander Agamemnon, the commander of the troops who got wealth and loot from the war, was immediately killed on his return home as a victim of conspiracy of his wife Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. The Zeus entourage knew in advance of the heroes who were destined to die in this war. That is, their fate had been predetermined. A bright example is Achilles, who was later on a role model for Alexander the Great. Achilles' heel. The sea goddess Thetis, knowing that her son Achilles, while he was the youngest of the generation of heroes, the future participants of the Trojan War, was destined to die, tried to hide him. However, eventually, they still didn't save the hero, who was considered to be invulnerable. He was found, returned to the Trojan War, and killed. He died from 2 arrows of Paris, guided by the hand of Apollo. The expression Achilles' heel for the elite was an example that is enough to hit a hero into a vulnerable spot to kill him. While for mere mortals, Achilles' way of life was instilled as a behavior model for new generations of mortal heroes, where a hero had to know that he was destined to live a short life, and he had to strive to live it so that the glory of his unprecedented bravery would last among descendants for centuries. Hero. The etymology of the ancient Hellenic word hero is interesting. By the word hero, the ancient Greeks originally called the spirit of the dead, which influenced the living ones, that is, a sub-personality. Heroes were the souls of outstanding ancestors, leaders. Later on, the concept expanded, and some people born from the union of the gods with mortals began to be categorized as heroes. In the poems such as the Iliad, heroes were considered to be benefactors of people, slayers of monsters and giant robbers. But there was one point: the main heroes were often doomed to death by the will of gods or committed suicide. And as a rule, in honor of the day of their death, general sports games were held with lighting of torch. Hence, the tradition of the Olympic Games in ancient Greece emerged. The same story can be traced in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, where gods decide on the death of the hero having refused immortality to him, they announce through their messenger that he will have a remarkable after-death fate, and a monument will be erected to him. Moreover, every summer in the month of Nenejar, athletic competition in his honor will take place near his statue. The gods reminded to Gilgamesh that he had been born for long-term kinship, but he wasn't promised eternal life. They advised him to accept his lot and hurry to his ancestors. That is, the cult of the deceased heroes was intentionally cultivated. The life of one hero was not enough to fulfill all plans of the gods' elite. Therefore, the idea of suffering of a heroic personality, an endless overcoming of trials and difficulties, is strengthened in the myths. The hero often experiences painful death. The self-immolation of Heracles dies by the hand of a deceitful villain, Theseus, by the will of a hostile deity, Orpheus, Hippolytus. As a result, the image of Heracles stays on Olympus, while his shadow wanders in Hades. And that the hero's exploits and sufferings are regarded as a kind of trial, the reward for which comes after death. Priests were looking for a formula by which people will live all their lives in expectation of immortality, not working spiritually in themselves, but wasting their lives on strengthening the power of priests and leaders. That's where the substitutions came from, that a human can meet God only after death, but not unite with Him during lifetime by working spiritually in oneself, meaning it's a false hope, promises from the system for later times. Millennia passed, and the same game was being imposed on the human society, all the same division into gods, heroes and savages, as the Sumerians had, except for these concepts were increasingly embedded into the minds of new generations as the only form of existence of a human being, which supposedly his or her freedom and life goal consisted in. But in fact, there was an enslavement of humankind by the system and concentration of attention on the consciousness dictate. Etymology of the ancient Greek word tragedy. In the ancient Greek language, the word tragos means goat, ode, son. Thus, the word tragodia literally meant the son of goats. As it is known, tragedy as a theatrical entertainment for the elite audience was born in ancient Greece, Ellada. The most ancient theatrical performances were inextricably connected with the cult of the Hellenic god of fertility, the son of Zeus and Demeter, Dionysus, or his other name is Bacchus, where the word bacchanalia came from, as unrestrained self-will, a wild feast, an orgy, a festival in honor of Bacchus, the god of wine and merriment. At first, various legends about Dionysus were set forth in the form of a dialogue between the chorus and its leader, the Coryphaeus. The chorus usually consisted of satyrs, goat-hoofed companions of Dionysus. Actors who imitated satyrs, these half-humans, half-goats, were dressed in goat skins. Exactly singing of the chorus of goat-hoofed satyrs got the name of tragodia. And so it goes since those times. For people, it's a tragedy, while for the elite, it is merely a son of goats. That is the uncontrolled rivalry of the animal mind system in the human society, where people's attention is concentrated solely on the human-animal nature. Fear, hatred, anger, conflicts. The system is always insatiable. What does the dictate of consciousness demand when it monocratically rules the personality, bread and circuses? For the system, which is always hungry, the bread is human life, bloody massacres, and the circuses are concentration of people's attention on these events, stimulation of the animal nature in a human, and consequently, it is feed for the system. Therefore, it's not surprising that the main entertainment of El and his elite was focused on wars and conflicts, especially when unsurpassed weapons were in their sole possession. Climate weapons. Ijokas is one of the epithets of Zeus, literally meaning the bearer of the aegis, the shield bearer. Aegis is the shield of Zeus. Aegis or Aegis, in translation from ancient Greek, means storm, whirlwind. It was believed that Zeus raised severe storms by means of this shield. The modern expression "under the Aegis" means being under the protection, patronage of a person, or acting within the framework of an institution, organization, or enterprise. For example, to act under the aegis of the United Nations, and so on. It is mentioned that Zeus, reigning on Mount Olympus, commands nature and rules the destiny of people. He creates thunder, and by collecting clouds, he causes storms with a single shake of his aegis. He is the center of winds, rains, and downpours. Originally, Zeus didn't possess these weapons. At the beginning of his rise and struggle for power, his brothers and sisters were forced to give thunder and lightning into Zeus' possession. It was believed that by means of the Aegis, the terrifying shield, Zeus raised severe storms. Throwing lightning with his right hand, with his left hand Zeus shakes the Aegis covered with 100 tassels. There was the head of Medusa the Gorgon in the center of the Aegis. By shaking the Aegis, Zeus generated peals of thunder that frightened gods and mortals. The Aegis belonged not only to Zeus. It could be carried by Athena, and in exceptional cases by Apollo. The fact that destructive storms and winds were the field of activity of various gods, who destroyed by means of them their enemies and the cities they hated, is also mentioned in the Sumerian and Akkadian epic. According to a legend, Zeus owned winds. He enclosed the winds behind the steep cliffs of the floating island of Aeolia, surrounded by a copper wall. Zeus entrusted Aeolus, the king of this island, to look after them. It was mentioned that if one gives total freedom to these winds, they will raise the earth and the sea into the air. The duty of Aeolus was to release winds one by one according to the gods or his own desire. When a storm was needed, Aeolus threw a spear into the rock, and the wind began to blow from the formed hole until Aeolus closed it. He was so diligent towards the Olympian gods that, in the opinion of Zeus' wife Hera, he even deserved an invitation to attend the feasts of the gods. Attributes of Zeus are Aegis, scepter, and hammer. Zeus is the establisher of every order and law on earth. The gods and mortals are in awe of him. By violent suppression of resistance and punishment, Zeus establishes his principles by force. One of Zeus' weapons is also the thunderbolt, that emits lightning. The image of God's weapons may be found not only on the artifacts of ancient Greece, but also of Sumer, ancient India, and other peoples. Ancient Greek legends say that Cyclops forged thunder, lightning, and thunderbolt for Zeus to fight against the Titans. Zeus puts into action the thunderbolt, thunder and lightning in battles, so that Hades itself trembles, and the giant Earth moans sorrowfully. When the Olympians and the Titans throw rocks and mountains at each other, the heat from Zeus' lightning scorches the world. A whirlwind of flame rises. The earth, the ocean, and the sea boil. Heat and chaos cover the earth. The sun is covered by a cloud of rocks and cliffs, which the enemies hurl. The sea roars, the earth trembles, or the giants trample, while their wild shouts reach the starry sky. Aren't these descriptions familiar to you as the consequences of atomic bomb bursts? Nuclear wars of antiquity. The hidden history. Have you ever wondered where in the literature of antiquity the notion that war is connected with the will of gods came from? Where did such a ritual originate from in the human society, at which a tribe or a people, before going on a military campaign, should make a sacrifice to one of their divine patrons with a request to protect them and to grant them victory? Why was there a certainty that this patron deity would take a personal part in battles, supporting them with the weapons of the gods? And finally, whence did the peoples that knew only spears, bow and arrows know about ancient events characterizing the conduct of nuclear and thermonuclear wars? As of today, a lot of inconvenient facts have been accumulated contradicting the official version of world history and indicating that the world has already plunged into the abyss of a world nuclear war, and this resulted in a global disaster, extremely deplorable for the entire humanity of that time. Nuclear wars have already taken place in the distant past and left a lot of geological evidences of large-scale military conflicts of antiquity. These are the presence of multiple craters, the increased content of radioactive isotopes, the presence of radioactive zones, the existence of huge tektite strewn field on different continents, the formation of some dating back to the period of 12,000 years ago, as well as a number of differences from tektites of natural origin. Tektites are pieces of natural glass melted due to a sudden, significant increase in temperature and rapid cooling. Today, a similar picture may be observed at nuclear test sites. It is known that tektite fields appeared in the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki after the explosion of nuclear bombs in 1945. Such ancient epicenters, the consequences of atomic explosions of destructive power, are found in different parts of the globe, which evidences a large-scale military conflict with the use of not just nuclear, but also the type of currently unknown weapon. Legends of different peoples also bear evidence of the Great War of Gods with the application of all-destroying weapons. One of such vivid examples is the ancient Indian epic Mahabharata, which describes the war and its consequences after the use of unusual, all-destructing weapons. Interesting facts. Fact 1. It is interesting that the first edition of the Mahabharata epic poem, narrating about the Great War and discords, was carried out in the same 7th century BC, rich in events of El supporters. Moreover, history repeats itself. Just as in the story with the mysterious Homer, the text processing is attributed to one author, the legendary mysterious sage who edits the famous ancient Indian epic Mahabharata, as well as the Vedas, Puranas, and other Indian philosophical texts. He is called Sage Vyasa, whose name in Sanskrit means division, separation, distraction, dispersion. He is also called Shashvata, that is immortal, eternal. Fact 2. In the Mahabharata epic poem, according to the plan of gods, by the hands of some people, the others, who are their relatives by the way, should be exterminated. One of the main negative characters is Karna, whose image by its tragic intensity is close to the image of the hero Achilles, from the Iliad epic poem by Homer. Just like Achilles, Karna died. Moreover, in the legend, more space is given to the description of Karna's death than to anyone else's, including the divine Krishna. Fact 3. The Mahabharata indicates that these events, the war with the use of the weapons of gods, and the following cataclysms occurred at the turn of the age of Dvapara Yuga, where people had an opportunity to live for 1,000 years, and the age of Kali Yuga. Megaliths. So, was there a civilization in ancient times with high technologies, the development of which exceeded the discoveries of modern science? Certainly. More information on the science of antiquity may be found in the primordial alatra physics. As of today, there are a lot of artifacts, ranging from remnants of ancient knowledge and up to megalithic structures ideally preserved over millennia. It is enough for any skeptic to pay attention to that very science of the ancient East and ask oneself a question: from where the ancients knew accurate values in geometry, mathematics, and physics? But perhaps the most obvious evidence is the megalithic cities, located in different parts of the world, and the technology of their construction, which modern humankind cannot reproduce until today. Monoliths, menhirs, pyramids, cities, temples, palaces, airports, and other ancient buildings that have been discovered in different parts of the world, amazed by their scale, stability, and perfection of structures. Almost all the buildings of antiquity were erected of large and heavy stones, megaliths, that weighed several dozens and sometimes hundreds of tons. Sometimes in the building masonry and in the form of separate monoliths, there are also heavier stone blocks, trilithons, the weight of which is over 1,000 tons. Engineers of the distant past had the knowledge of how to make a solid structure of stones with the enormous weight, how to lift large stone blocks to set them at a high altitude and fasten together without mortar. They knew how to make a polygonal lane, how to make a high-quality alloys for solid metal bracings. Even today we can see that cuts on the stones are made by mechanisms with pinpoint accuracy, which produced the effect of a tight fit of the stones, in the chinks between which it's impossible to insert even a razor blade. Masters of the past left lots of marks that indicate the use of high-tech equipment, superpower circular slabs, grinding machines, drills, possibly ultrasonic, cutters, and many other devices that the current civilization is yet unaware of. The traces left impress with their flatness, ultra-thinness, and accuracy, large sizes and high quality of the devices themselves, which can easily deal with stone products of high-quality hard rocks. Megaliths were made at a high level not just technically, but also their location, the form of constructions. The images left on the stones were made based on the knowledge of astronomy, geography, advanced mathematics, and other exact sciences. But what are all these high technologies and grand buildings worth when a society loses its spirituality? There is nothing worse than evil on a throne, when power, terrible in itself, is becoming its spouse. Under the aegis of El, high technologies, one world government, immortality, cloning, games of gods, climate weapons, nuclear wars, destruction of Atlantisz. As of today, the world public remains in the captivity of elcentrism, and everything is imbued with it, beginning with programs of the education system of new generations that is adopted in civilized countries, which impose a study of history and literature within certain limits, and ending with implantation of names from the literary heritage of the servants of El as the names of various communities, global projects, companies, enterprises, household items, and so on. Have you ever wondered why there are many people today who don't believe in God, mistakenly thinking that it's an old man with beard sitting on a throne? However, at the same time, they understand that there is something supreme after all, but in the form of the universal mind, the system. As a result, believers have questions. Since God is so loving, why does He allow wars and discord? From where there appeared so many people who are proud of atheism and consider the history of wars to be more important than spiritual knowledge? Where does it come from that world economy is much more important than human freedoms, that material values prevail over human life? People don't notice who has been reigning in their heads for a long time. They use words without understanding their true meaning. Even the personal names of many people are not the original names of the peoples they belong to, but these are the names that have ancient Greek or Hebrew etymology of origin. The question is, Why is it like this and not otherwise? Do you think this doesn't concern you, and you're not involved in the game of the system? Look carefully. What kind of information are you surrounded with? And what kind of comparisons and images are hovering in your thoughts? What do the today's rhapsodies of L's servants make you dream of? What do you subconsciously choose every day? Today, the word elite is embedded in the minds of consumers as something qualitatively higher, which a person should supposedly strive for, which he can achieve in this world through his wickedness and entrepreneurship, by applying maximum power of attention. Elite cars, elite houses, elite goods, business elite, sports elite, art elite, political elite, military elite, ideological elite. But what is the elite in the original understanding of this word? Elite means the servants of the devil's slave, El. But what is the price of such selectedness? Whom does it beget in the consumer society? Is the literature which is now introduced into the ranks of masterpieces of world classics so harmless? The remnants of knowledge about the Atlanteans have been preserved in esoteric religious traditions of different peoples. The priests were their keepers. Many occult organizations appeal to the knowledge of the Atlanteans. Theosophical and anthroposophical societies try to reconstruct the legacy of Atlantis. The emphasis was made on the selected race of people, or the domination of one nation, which allegedly originates from the gods of Atlantis, over others. This idea of dividing off the lords from slaves was used by dictators in different times. In the cultural tradition of modern times, Atlantis has become one of the symbols of the triumph of intellect, the vehicle of ideas for the formation of social ideals of consumer society. Alexander the Great, who was convinced of the idea of monocracy establishment, that is of sole lordship over the world, is far from the only example of influence on people's choice, under the impact of such literature in the interpretation of L's servants. Another vivid example is Reichsführer of SS, Heinrich Himmler, who at his time was also firmly convinced in not only the existence of Atlantis and further resettlement of the Atlanteans, but also in the fact that the descendants of the Atlanteans have remained in their best form only in Germany. In 1945, the Allies found in his library pretty heavily used books about the Atlantean civilization, including the Glacial Cosmogony by Herbiger about the super race of people, the race of lords which acquainted the Greeks, Egyptians and others with the civilization. Who benefits from this and why? Do you think it happened accidentally that in culturological tradition of modern times, Atlantis is a symbol of the triumph of intellect? How many films, literary works, articles have been devoted to it? How much attention and effort have been spent and involved in its search? But what is this all for? Have you ever wondered why in your consciousness, without your desire, a deliberately positive image of Atlantis is actively being formed? Atlantis is still searched for until now, but it is interesting where the attention of new generations is being directed, to the search for answers to the question where it was located and what happened to it, but not more. What have modern people incidentally heard about Atlantis? That a tragedy happened to Atlantis, that highly spiritual and highly educated people, a race of lords, live there. What is the expected result? The program implanted by L is the desire for world lordship. The global interest of certain individuals who are planning for centuries is quite obvious. The establishment of a new world order in human society, and L's return to the throne. But there is an ancient expression, Every power arouses vices. Absolute power generates a dragon. The information is scattered. And without a key, a person doesn't have a global understanding, believing in something that is feeding his pride, thereby getting into the system which manipulates him from outside. And there are millions of people like him. The servants of El only order PR in mass media. But all this propaganda and implementation of the ideas of world lordship are being done by the hands of misled people, deprived of their history. With people's lives, the elite, the descendants of El, are paving their way into the future, in which they deeply believe, hoping for resumption of their bygone power. But what motivates the servants of El to do all these things today, if this is mere history? The answer is simple: the system's promise of the 9th day. They believe that in the future created by them, when El comes to the power again, they will resurrect in material bodies in Elysium, because in their secret orders, under a great secret accessible only to the initiated ones, legends have been preserved that all this is absolutely real, has a scientific basis, and similar resurrection in bodies was carried out in the times of El. As a matter of fact, this is a lie, because during El's reign the experiments were conducted, but only with regard to the transfer of a part of a human consciousness and creation of a body from the DNA of the deceased 40 days after his death. But the deception consisted in the fact that the personality of the human himself, the one who the human is and feels himself during lifetime, actually became a personality, while people were shown a copy, just a clone of a human, but not the human himself. Everything is false in the system. The one who knows the past understands the present and can foresee the future. Sumerian cuneiform tablet. And what's the result? The system standardly creates its hotspots and uses people who live in illusions of obsessive thoughts, not knowing that they are being manipulated by the system and how this game of material immortality will end, first of all for themselves. Their dream of immortality in a material body is the dream of the system about the 9th day, which will remain an empty illusion, because the system itself is finite and mortal. Its momentary existence with billions of years is nothing for the world of eternity, for the spiritual world. As Igor Mikhailovich Danilov said, the system is designed in such a way that your consciousness erases all the discoveries that you receive, and all understandings disappear very quickly, driving you into the stall of ordinary life. And only a mist remains of your freedom and understandings. But in order for the system not to deprive you of understanding and gained freedom, you must work very hard and not give power over you as personality to demons in your head, to those whom you perceive as your own thoughts and desires. Only this way you can gain true life and real freedom. The one who knows the truth can change the future.